Well, some European states are already following in America's footsteps, issuing their own assessment of Russian interference in their internal affairs. In fact, a report in Sweden by a respected foreign policy institute accuses Moscow of spreading fake news about the country. Nadira Tudor has more.
Any esteemed blueprint will have a legion of copycats who will also follow the conventional rules of franchising. And, of course, the ones blaming Russia for waging an information war are no exception. Let's take a reputable organisation with strong credentials. Concoct a lengthy report with a bold heading. Saturate with terrifying terminology familiar to the audience. Add a large army of Russian trolls. Throw in the customary information warfare and covert influence strategy. In the Swedish report, words like fake, disinformation, threat and deception have been used more than 213 times. Bring in the Russian media, RT or Sputnik, and imply wrongdoings.
It's a shame that Russia is not allowed to have its own opinions. Americans are. Swedes should have be entitled to have opinions too, without being attacked by their own tax-financed kampfund by this type of people. This is the type of analysis that Swedish taxpayers have to make do with. This is tragic.
In case you're the inquisitive type who demands hard facts to support the claims of the report, you'll be strongly disappointed. If you manage to find examples of alleged Russian disinformation or hacking, it will mostly look like this. Russia criticising EU governments and presenting the bloc as suffering from major financial and migrant crises. Of course, this is deemed as Kremlin propaganda, ignoring the fact that just as many Swedish media outlets did the same. What about claims that a Russian bank was financing France's Marine Le Pen back in 2014? Everybody heard about that one, except that it didn't. The bank's license was revoked, effectively leaving the Front National to fend for itself. But who cares about that? And now, for the biggest crime, Russia's Sputnik news agency launching its website in 33 different languages. Why? And here's the big reveal to make sure people from different countries understand what's being said. Scary, isn't it? Here's the most curious part of this report. Why accuse Russia of disinformation, forged telegrams and fake news to influence Swedish public opinion, and then backtrack by admitting that the fakes originated on social media and have no proven links to Russia?
It is biased research, it's politicized research, and not objective, good social science. You don't publish things that are so easily shut down, you know. And there should have been in this report a decent little bit of information theory and how information is related to politics. I wouldn't let it pass at a master's course if I was a professor of this researcher.
Well, one of the most recent attacks that Russian hackers supposedly carried out targeted the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. Its IT system was breached and security compromised. Some media immediately pointed the finger at Russia, citing unnamed sources and intelligence agencies. The OSCE itself, though, confirmed the attack but said it didn't have the resources to investigate who is behind it. The watchdog also said Russian involvement was mere speculation. Maximilian Krah from Germany's AfD party says that stories like this one actually only fuel anti-Russian rhetoric.
That's something which makes me very angry, because this is indeed now a fake news trend to create Russophobia and to use it for political benefit. First of all, we don't know who it was, which country it was. We don't know how many countries are trying to do it. Here it is to say, okay, there's Russia, and to use it to make people frightened, to speak out what they think. The whole propaganda on Russian hacking and Russian fake news is nothing but an attempt to get restriction on the internet and to limit freedom of speech.
Meanwhile, Europe is now preparing to counter a perceived Russian military threat. NATO countries in the east of the continent are waiting for the arrival of thousands of American soldiers as part of a US-led battle group. Here's the alliance's promotional video.
Rozpoczęliśmy już kroki w związku z przyjazdem Amerykanów. Stworzyliśmy dla nich kartę menu w języku angielskim i będą też kursy języka angielskiego dla personelu.
A NATO operation titled Atlantic Resolve will see the deployment of thousands of American soldiers and tanks to the continent. However, ships carrying the first batch of troops were greeted in a German port by signs reading "Army, go home." They'll be joined by units from other NATO countries and positioned in Eastern Europe over the next few weeks or so. As we can see here, the troops will be stationed along the Russian border from Estonia all the way down to Bulgaria there. The deployment was announced by the US government in October in response to concerns from Russia's Baltic neighbours over perceived aggression from Moscow. The arrival of the troops has sparked anger in Germany, though. Scores of protesters did march through the port city of Bremerhaven, urging an end to the alliance's sabre-rattling. Some protesters called the deployment a militaristic march against Russia.
With the deployment of 2,000 vehicles and 4,000 soldiers from the US, all passing through Bremerhaven on the Russian border, I am here to explain peace to the Russians, because I'm afraid of new wars. This big maneuver scares me, and I'm here to speak out against it.
This has to end. Spend money on meaningful things, on kindergartens in Bremen and Bremerhaven, on affordable housing for everyone, on wages that are enough to survive on. We will not pay for your wars. We are standing here against this maneuver.
And in Eastern Europe, not everybody is happy with NATO's presence there. In July, protesters gathered in Warsaw against the military alliance's summit, which was being held in the Polish capital. And while campaigners called for peace, the rhetoric of NATO's commander at the time was quite different.
Remember, we spent almost two decades hugging the bear. Now we need to be able to react to a revanchist Russia that puts force back on the table.
It's clearly an escalation that involves numerous facets, including propaganda about Russian crimes in the U.S. media, that includes shipping troops and equipment to the border, that includes expanding NATO and pushing hard on other NATO members to join in this escalation. I think there is, starting from Washington, D.C., a major push to do everything possible in the next 2 weeks to create unending hostility between the West and Russia that can't be undone by Donald Trump or anyone else.
Now, as the nationwide ceasefire in Syria is holding and more areas are joining the truce, families are finally able to be reunited. But as Lizzie Phelan reports, there are many cases where the family has no idea what has happened to their loved ones.
The last time these little girls saw their mum, 3 years before, a Kalashnikov was being pointed at her. She was being kidnapped from Adra city in Damascus province in front of their eyes.
That moment when I first saw my daughters, I started screaming like crazy. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I wasn't really seeing them. I hugged them and cried, but I didn't feel as though I was hugging them. I felt like I was hallucinating.
For a year and a half, Arij didn't see daylight. She was locked in the basement of an infamous jail in the outskirts of Damascus. There, the powerful rebel faction, Jaish al-Islam, paraded captives from the minority Alawite sect in cages, supposedly to deter airstrikes.
At first we were in the custody of Jaish al-Islam. Then they separated us between different factions. Every militia fighting in Adra was rewarded with more captives according to how effective they were in the battlefield. The biggest group of captives was awarded to Jaish al-Islam.
Reis's sister is still being held hostage. Their ordeal isn't over, but their suffering eased with Arij, at least back home.
This problem every day grew and grew. It didn't get easier. It got harder. It's worse than death. If I know my wife is dead, okay, she is dead. Every day they would call me and tell me that they would cut her arm off or her leg. We'll take a photo of her arm that we cut off and send it to you. This was their way to frighten me.
For the duration of Arija's captivity, she and her husband knew her captor's goal wasn't to kill her, but to use her in a prisoner exchange. Asmahan, on the other hand, has no way of knowing if her husband and 2 sons are alive or dead. This video, shot in 2012, showing them with the rebels, is the last she saw of them.
I feel like I have lost my mind. Until now, if I see the video, I feel lost. Where shall I go? I have lost 3 people. I don't have anyone, just my son, my other 2 sons. They are part of me. They have gone, and until now I have no information about them.
All Asmahan can hope for is to keep her last son away from military conscription and Syria's deadly front lines. To do that, he needs to be recognized as her only son, so she must register her missing family as dead. But first, she needs to find the legal fees. But her family has already been left impoverished by their ordeal, an ordeal for which, like countless other Syrians, they may never find closure.
For the last 4 years, when I wake up like I am in a nightmare. If I know just where they are, maybe they are martyrs. If they are martyrs, I will be proud, but I don't know.
Lizzie Phelan, reporting from Damascus for RT.
Meanwhile, Russia's anti-terror effort in Syria has been criticised by the US Defence Secretary. While speaking on American television, Ash Carter said that Moscow had done nothing in terms of fighting Islamic State.
They haven't done anything against
you mean anything? Did you put it at 0?
Virtually 0. They came in, they said they were going to fight ISIL, and they said they were going to help end the civil war in Syria. They haven't done either of those things.
Well, Russia's anti-terror operation in Syria did start back in 2015. For more than a year, Russian aircraft conducted thousands of sorties against terrorist cells in the country, including Islamic State positions. In fact, dozens of terrorist oil facilities were destroyed as a result of the strikes. And back in March, too, the Russian military helped Syrian government forces retake the ancient city of Palmyra from ISIL. Then, in terms of bringing peace to Syria, at the end of December, Russia, Turkey and Iran brokered a nationwide ceasefire. Middle East expert Joshua Landis believes that Washington just wanted Islamic State to defeat Assad.
You know, America has been very confused about its Syria policy. We just heard these long tapes of John Kerry, Secretary of State, explaining to Syrian activists that that when Russia intervened in Syria in 2015, the United States had been hoping that the growth of ISIS and its increasing spread towards Damascus would cause Assad to cry uncle and make a political deal. Instead, the Russians intervened and saved Damascus from falling to ISIS. The Russians have, in fact, bombed ISIS hundreds of times in Palmyra, in El-Bab, in Deir ez-Zor, and in Raqqa. So the Russians have taken out long trails of tanker trucks and so forth.
Still to come to you this hour, as Barack Obama gets ready to vacate the Oval Office, we look at his administration's legacy. And as a prominent Paris newspaper refuses to use opinion polls in their coverage of the country's upcoming presidential elections, we'll look at why the pollsters have fallen from grace. These stories to come.